Welcome to the Oral History Podcast, featuring stories from the oral history website voicesofoklahoma.com, where Oklahomans have given generously of their time to tell their life stories for present-day listeners and for generations to come. Our entire collection is available on the website voicesofoklahoma.com. Subscribe to be notified of new Oklahoma oral history podcasts. Here's another interesting storyteller from voicesofoklahoma.com. Tulsa Civic leader and oil man Robert Bob LaFortune was born at St. John Medical Center in Tulsa, January 24, 1927. In 1920, his father, Joseph A. LaFortune, and his mother, Gertrude Leona LaFortune, had moved to Tulsa from South Bend, Indiana. Joseph LaFortune worked for Warren Petroleum Company for approximately 30 years, retiring as executive vice president. Before and after retirement, he maintained a significant community presence and funded the development of LaFortune Park in Tulsa. Among his many gifts to the University of Notre Dame were funds he donated to renovate the Science Hall into the school's first student center. Bob LaFortune served as Tulsa's Commissioner of Streets and Public Property from 1964 to 1970 and as mayor from 1970 to 1978. As commissioner, he participated in the development of the Port of Catoosa through purchasing land for the port and working with engineers on its design. As mayor, he played a significant role in developing Tulsa's freeway system and securing public-private funding for construction of the city's Performing Arts Center. Because of the generous donations of foundations and many individuals, you can hear Robert LaFortune in this oral history interview on voicesofoklahoma.com. Our mission is to preserve Oklahoma's legacy, one voice at a time.
My name is John Erling. Today's date is April 6, 2009. State your name.
I'm Bob LaFortune.
Where were you born?
I'm a native Tulsan. I was born here in January of 1927.
Tell us the building where we are right now.
We're having this meeting in my office, 937, the Phil Tower building at 5th and Boston, downtown Tulsa.
Tell us how the LaFortune family came to Tulsa.
My parents moved to Tulsa in 1920, shortly after they were married in South Bend, Indiana. Both my parents come from South Bend, my mother from Mishawaka, which is a suburb of South Bend.
And their names were?
My dad's name was Joseph A. LaFortune, and my mother's name was Gertrude Leona LaFortune. Her maiden name was Tremmel.
You have brothers and sisters?
Yes, our family consists of 4 children, an older sister, Jean, who's now deceased. I have a brother and a sister who are twins, Mary Ann Wilcox, and my brother, J.A. LaFortune, Jr.
Can I jump back to your grandfather and grandmother, where they were, or how they...
Yes, on the maternal side, my grandparents lived in Mishawaka, Indiana. They were Germans. The earlier family name, beside Tremmel, which is my mother's maiden name, on the maternal side was Wax, W-A-C-H-S. So my mother grew up in a very German community in Mishawaka. Originally, they immigrated from the Wax did from Europe, from the Alsace-Lorraine area of France and Germany. On the paternal side, the knowledge we have is a little earlier. There was a French soldier who came to the Canadian province in about 1635 as a soldier, I'm sure to fight the British, because they were always fighting each other all the time. After his soldiering, he settled in an area near Montreal. Successive generations of his family farmed on a river going kind of northwest from Montreal. The original name of that soldier was not as constituted today. It was at the time Tillier de LaFortune. The name got shortened as the family, I think, according to my dad, migrated to South Bend, Indiana, just for purposes of writing the name in a payroll. They took off the Tillier Day and left the LaFortune. On my mother's side, I have all German heritage, so I would be a half German. And then from my father's side, because he had an Irish mother and a Canadian-French father, I'd be a fourth Irish and a fourth French.
When your father came to Tulsa, what was his job? Why did he come professionally?
My dad dropped out of school in the 7th grade, and that was to support the family. He worked. When he was about 19 or 20 years old, he took some day courses at Notre Dame in journalism. Then he went in the Naval Air Corps during World War I, served for about a year. Did not go overseas with that, but finished that. Then he got a job with the YMCA, kind of in bodybuilding and physical training. And someone in that interest suggested to him that he should look at Oklahoma as a place to move, that it was kind of a new frontier, obviously, in the oil business. So that's what he decided he would try. Other than that, he worked for the Indiana Water and Gas Company in South Bend for a while. Then when he was about 25, he decided to come to Tulsa. He came down here first and looked for work. An interesting story about how he looked for work that he always used to tell us. Since he didn't really know anybody or have any contacts here, he just went to the tallest building in Tulsa, which I think at the time may have been the Kennedy Building or one of those. He said, I just went to the top floor and just started going in all of the offices and worked my way down to the street floor because he had a little work in journalism. That was his interest. He went to the Tulsa World, got a job there as a reporter, which didn't last very long. He always told us that they eventually let him go. He got a job with the Mid-Continent Oil and Gas Association, and then he developed his own business of writing house bulletins for small oil and gas companies. That eventually led him to meet W.K. Warren. This is after they were married, obviously. I can go back to that in a minute. He met W.K. Warren, and he and his wife had a business marketing natural gasoline products. My dad wrote this house bulletin for his company for a while. Eventually, Mr. Warren offered him a job. My dad took the job, but also required that he receive some kind of stock interest in this little company. So rather than putting all of his earnings in a salary, he took this stock interest in the company, which eventually, of course, had a lot to do with the wealth that he was able to build. Going back a little now, maybe to my mother and dad, they were married in 1920. My dad moved mother down to Tulsa. The first place they lived was what they call the Library Apartments. If you remember, our earlier Carnegie Library for Tulsa was at 3rd and Cheyenne. There was a 3-story or so apartment building next door to that on the west side, and that's where they lived for the early years of their marriage. Then within a few years, they had their first daughter, my sister Jean, who deceased in about 1987. And then they had my twin brother and sister, Mary Ann and Buddy, in 1925, and then I was born in 1927.
So then that was Warren Petroleum that he worked for, your father?
Yes, it was Warren Petroleum. That was a very unique business in that day because Bill Warren had established a business of recovering liquid products from the gas stream that came out of the oil fields. If you remember the early days of the oil field production all over Texas, Oklahoma, wherever, Louisiana, was that a lot of gas was flared. A lot of the historical pictures have huge gas flares. Well, that's because people didn't have any end use of that natural gas that was coming out as the oil was being produced. Companies, however, were beginning to look at that gas as a resource. And they also learned that there were a lot of liquid products that was flared with that gas. So businesses were established that recovered the natural gas through gasoline plants, they called it. Gasoline plants would recover the different fractions of the natural gas, the highest fractions being like an ethane, or then a propane, or then a butane, and then a lower fraction which was called natural gasoline. The Warren Petroleum Company had a motto that was on all of their logos in the early days. It said, just natural gasoline. And that's because they went around to different crude oil producers who were flaring this gas. They'd write up a contract to take the gas, and they'd market it through a gasoline plant. The liquid products would come off. They'd sell the higher products, the butane and propane, for chemicals and for household heating. And the lower products, like the natural gasoline, was recycled back into the crude oil streams to the refiners. And obviously, being a product like that, it upgraded the quality of the crude oil. So it was a very valuable product in the refining process. That's why that company thrived during the 1920s and even the 30s, when the Great Depression was on. That company was thriving because of the capture of these end products.
Over the years, your father moved up in rank within the company?
My dad was always the number 2 person behind Bill Warren. The company bought and built natural gasoline plants. They had small natural gas gathering systems, and they gradually established themselves as a public company. They went on the New York Stock Exchange in the late 40s, I think. And, of course, my dad had this interest that he had acquired in the very earliest days with Bill Warren. So that maintained a substantial stock ownership for our family, so to speak, in the company. Warren Petroleum then eventually sold to the Gulf Oil Company initially, and then Gulf sold to Chevron and so on. So that was a very beneficial thing for our family, and probably one of the reasons that my dad found the wealth that he did.
He was very involved in the community.
My dad was always involved in something in the community. He was the leader of one of the United Way campaigns here. He was involved in a lot of the Catholic organizations for fundraising principally. He was also very much involved in the natural gas industry as a leader there. He retired from Warren in the very early 1950s. He had had 30 years then with the Warren Petroleum Company. He took a job during the Korean War with the Secretary of Commerce as the Assistant Director of Energy for President Eisenhower. And he served, it was like $1 a year job that he took on. He and Mother moved to Washington while he did that. And they were mainly concerned about the ability of the country to move liquid products through pipelines and through tankers from the Gulf Coast to the East Coast to supply, obviously, warships on the East Coast. So that was his job, was to assure that the country was adequately providing fuel and liquid products for our Navy, in particular, or the armed forces during the Korean War.
One of the big footprints that he placed in Tulsa was LaFortune Park. Do you remember in his thought process how that all developed?
Well, it's very interesting because my dad had always been interested in physical activity. Played a lot of golf, didn't do any other strenuous sports, but he certainly was an avid golfer. One of the things that was happening in Tulsa at the time was that they had a county, I'll call it a county poor farm, because that's where the county could place indigent families who were unable otherwise to support themselves. And remember, this is during the 30s, during the Depression, maybe in the 40s, before the welfare system was really developed at the federal level. So families would be housed at the county farm. Well, the county farm happened to be a half-section, 320 acres of land between 51st and 61st Street on Yale. With the advent of the welfare system coming down from the federal government and through the county, being actually managed through the county, the land at the county farm was no longer useful for the county to have. So they were considering disposing of it, actually selling it. Even that part of Tulsa was getting some development in those days. I remember this would be like the middle 1950s. So when some of the people in the Chamber of Commerce heard that the county was thinking of selling this, they approached the county commission and suggested that this would make a nice park for Tulsa. So the county commission consented to having something proposed. Then they went to my dad. Harvey Heller was one of the key persons. He was an oil and gas broker. He and some other people from the chamber approached my dad to develop this property as a county park. He took to the idea very quickly. He agreed to put up the funds to develop a golf course, a swimming pool, some tennis courts, and I think some softball fields. All that was put together as LaFortune Park. Probably the greatest delight of his life was the completion of that park.
It was named LaFortune because of his enormous donation to it, obviously?
Yes. Actually, the land was donated to Tulsa. They carved out 20 acres on the east side of the park for Memorial High School. The rest of the land was conserved for LaFortune Park.
Those who were used to the center of town where it is, that was miles and miles away.
Well, it was way out, but the city didn't have any parks of its own in that area. I mean, they were always having trouble finding open land priced right for them to be able to buy. So this was almost like a windfall to be able to have the county do this and not require it to be sold.
And that is the county, as you pointed out. A lot of people think LaFortune Park is city, but it is county, and now you've told us why it is.
Right. And you have to remember that the county, having 3 commissioners, they're all obviously very protective of their own commissioner district. So eventually it led to Chandler Park being developed for that particular district, District 1, and then O'Brien Park on the north side for District 2, and LaFortune Park for District 3. So each of the commissioners, so to speak, has a parochial interest in the park system. They have a major park in their commissioner district.
Anything else that you think about that your father delighted his involvement in the city of Tulsa?
His other interests were like the University of Tulsa, St. John Hospital, Cascia Hall School, Montecasina School. He was very generous with his donations to those entities.
He passed away in what year?
My dad died in 1975. My mother died in 1987.
Going back to you then, you were in fact born in St. John.
Yes, I was born the year after St. John opened, one of the earlier babies there.
And then you attended elementary school?
Yes, my schooling here in Tulsa was at Marquette through 6th grade. Then I went to Cascia Hall through graduation. And then before and after my service, I attended TU. And then in 1948, I was just about halfway through college at TU, and I transferred to Purdue University as a chemical engineer and graduated there in 1951.
After high school, though, your military service, what was that?
I went in what was called the Merchant Marine Cadet Corps. They had a cadet training program which led to both an ensign's degree and a maritime license. So I went in that in 1945. I went through their basic training at San Mateo, California for 3 months, and I went to sea a year. The war was just ending. The week that I first went out to sea on this cargo ship that I was on was VJ Day. So I was in San Francisco for VJ Day. That was a unique experience. I saw all of the things that you see pictures about today as a 18-year-old guy. I was at sea a year. I had a wonderful experience in the Western Pacific, and then back through the canal and up to New York and down to South America and North Africa and then Europe, and then home to New York. And then I went to school at the Merchant Marine Academy at Kings Point, New York.
Were you required in a draft then? The war was winding down. Would you have had to have gone into the military?
I was either going to go in the draft or I had this option to enlist in this.
You finished that and you finished your degree work at Purdue. Then who did you go to work for?
When I left Purdue, I got a job with a chemical company from Indianapolis as a salesman here in Tulsa. I worked for them for about 5 years. Covered all of Oklahoma, West Texas, New Mexico, Colorado, and Kansas, selling pipeline coating. They produced a coal tar enamel pipeline coating that was very much the standard for pipeline coatings at the time. Since then, it has fallen out of favor because of the environmental effects of coal tar smoke and the difficulty of putting it on and protecting the workers. Those kind of things just kind of happened with different products, obviously. But that was a good job I had. I learned a lot about the sales business at that time. I left that to go into the drilling business with a friend of mine.
What company was that?
Our drilling company we established with Bob Reed, who had married a neighbor of our families and was a friend of our families. His father-in-law was Dr. Weatherby, a well-known seismologist with Amarada. He and my dad were good friends. They saw an opportunity to help me get involved in the drilling business, so I bought some stock in it along with Dewey Bartlett, who later became the governor and senator, and his brother David Bartlett, who is a well-known Republican here in Tulsa, and the Lockwoods, who were Bob Lockwood and Ed Lockwood, well-known insurance people here in Tulsa. I went in that business in 1953. I was an investor in it for several years and not an active worker in it. In 58, when I left the chemical sales business, I went full-time with the drilling company. I was involved mainly in contact work, writing up contracts, and getting wells drilled.
How long did that association continue?
And that went on about 5 years. Then in 63, late 63, I was approached to run for office at the city level as a commissioner.
So then you maintained your interest in the business, re-drilling?
No, actually, re-drilling was being dissolved.
Okay.
Drilling prices kind of hit the tank. We just decided that it wasn't a profitable thing for either of us. We split the company up. I took the production that we had, the oil and gas production, and my partner took the equipment. He was still interested in doing that. That was probably a fortuitous thing as far as I was concerned, to not have to worry about the iron that went with it.
So then you decided to run for elective office. And
yes.
What office did you run for?
I was first approached to run for mayor. A good friend of mine, Mary Dunn, who's very active in our local Republican politics, and was married to an old family friend of ours, the Dunn family. She approached me about running for mayor. Well, I didn't know one thing about city government at that time. Very little awareness of what issues were and all that. I knew that Jim Maxwell had been the mayor for several years before then and was very well liked as a mayor. So I finally told her, I said, I just don't know enough about that I want to get in a campaign about it. So they said, well, you're an engineer. Why don't you run for the Commissioner of Streets and Public Property? That's an engineering job. They're over public buildings. They're over the building codes. They're over all the construction of new roads and things. That seemed to be more amenable to me, so that's what I did.
That would have been in 1964.
64.
One of the big projects you worked on was the building of the Port of Catoosa.
Yes, I was elected in 64. Right away, we began to put together some building projects. You have to remember the interstate highway system was coming on. It had already been somewhat funded in Tulsa. The Broken Arrow Expressway was in completion when I went into office in 64. In 1965, the city had a bond issue for not only streets, but also for the Port of Catoosa. We approved $20 million from Tulsa for the port. I think Rogers County put up $1 million. Of that $20 million, several million was reserved for purchasing the land at the port. That job was assigned to my office, to the street commissioner's office. We had a very limited budget, I think like $1 million or a little more. We were supposed to buy 2,200 acres out there in what they called then Rascal Flats. We hired a small staff to work for the city under my office. We acquired all that acreage over a period of about a year and a half. That became the Port of Catoosa.
Was it in 63 or so when the McClellan-Kerr Arkansas navigation system was beginning to be developed?
Yes, it was probably in construction in the mid-60s. It was finished, obviously, in 1971. I was in the mayor's office by then. But all during the late 60s, while I was a commissioner, these construction projects were going forward. I had an active role with the Arkansas Basin Development Association. I later chaired that for a couple of years. We were involved in all the lobbying for funding of the navigation channel. Every year you had to keep that funding stream up through the Congress.
It almost sounds easy here having you talk about it now, but there had to have been detractors and resistors in international shipping port in Tulsa, Oklahoma?
Well, that was a strange thing for most people to understand, that we could ever do that in the middle of the state. But as far as detractors, there were very few. Yeah. Very few. And frankly, I'm glad we got the port built when we did, because we'd have probably never built it today with all the environmental questions that would be asked.
Did you interact much then with Senator Robert Kerr, Senator John McClellan?
Not personally, I didn't. Most of their work had been done earlier in the 60s as far as getting the funding mechanisms begun. We did rely on Tom Steed and Paige Belcher and Mike Monroney. He was very instrumental in helping get the funding through the Senate, especially after Bob Kerr died, which I think was in '63. We had very good support from all of our delegation, though, for the funding.
It had to be like it was meant to be, because then you become mayor. As the port is opened and dedicated, you're the mayor of Tulsa, and you put so much work into that. President Nixon was here for the opening of the port.
We had the opening of the port in 1971. Another interesting story about that, prior to the formal dedication of the port, there was a little trip put together by some Chamber of Commerce people here. Ralph Lafferty, who ran Zebco here, Early Cass and Mark Tower and several others' names I can't pick up immediately. We planned a trip down the navigation channel in January of 1971. All of the locks and dams had been completed. So we put together 3 little outboard motor boats, 18 feet in length or so. We started out on like a 15-degree morning. There was ice on the river out there, I remember. We'd break the ice as we started down toward Inola, the first lock and dam. And we took a 3-day trip from Tulsa, stopping at Fort Smith the first night, Little Rock the second night. The third night, we were on the Mississippi and down the Mississippi at Greenville. We were met at each of these places by their chambers of commerce and their river enthusiasts and all that. It was a very exciting trip. There's a lot of memories for me today.
And those weren't big boats, 18-foot boats.
They were just little tiny boats. You get in these great big locks and dams. The walls of those things go up 20 feet above you, you know. Here they are opening these huge gates to let these little tiny boats go down the river.
Did you have any weather problems along the way?
No, we had good weather, fortunately.
Also, as mayor, you played a big role in our freeway system. Talk about some of the early decisions on that.
Well, of course, the job I had as a street commissioner had been done very well previous to me by Guy Hall in the city, Frank O'Brien in the county. They had already gotten some funding for various right-of-way acquisition projects on the interstate system, and also they had found money through various bond issues to acquire land for what they call the urban expressways, which didn't have interstate designation, but which required more local funding in order to acquire the right-of-way. Frankly, when I came in office, there had just been an earlier bond issue at the county level that had funded things like the Crosstown and the Keystone and done some really important advanced work on getting the system built. But when I came in office, you'll have to remember the Broken Arrow was being completed, but the Keystone was not built, Crosstown was not built, the Cherokee going north was not built. We still had the Riverside Expressway as a future project for our expressway system, but we knew that there were going to be neighborhood difficulties with that. That was kind of a whole new chapter, really, in my association with the expressway system, because the Maple Ridge neighborhood formed a group against building that system down the Midland Valley tracks onto Riverside Drive at 30th Street, and then down the riverbank to 51st Street. And of course, that became an issue of great controversy during my street commissioner days. Lawsuits were filed against that. Eventually, those lawsuits resulted in the Riverside Expressway being deleted from our system. Betsy Horowitz led the charge from the Maple Ridge group. She personally ran against me in my mayor's race at least twice. We had some heated discussions about expressways and what the effects were in Tulsa. And I can say today, without reservation, that it was fortunate that that got deleted from our system. I think it had no business being programmed in there to begin with, and would have taken away all of the potential for river development that we're seeing happening today, even though it's 50 years later.
Even though you were a strong proponent then of that expressway.
Yes, because I felt that that was my responsibility to carry out the plan, the highway plan that had been really approved in these earlier bond issues, so to speak, when people voted the various rights away.
Did all street bond issues get passed during your time?
No, I actually lost one in '69 when I was mayor. I think that was the only one.
But they must have come back and approved it as building continued on the streets.
I think most of the expressway items had already been approved through the 65 issues, as I recall. But we ran into difficulties when I was mayor in the latter couple of years of my term. You have to remember this is the late 70s. There were some hard times in the oil business. In the middle 70s, we had the embargoes and things like that were very difficult in our economy. It wasn't just all, smelling the roses. It was a difficult time to get any public funding for things. I want to mention one other thing with regard to expressways, because one of the key projects in all of our expressway system was what we call the Southeast Interchange. That doesn't mean anything to people today, but it completes the loop of expressways around the Central Business District. We did not have that designated on the interstate system when I came in office as a street commissioner. So we were always faced with having to buy the right-of-way ourselves as a city for that whole complex. As it came along, we just found that it was not probably going to be possible with the tenor of public acceptance of street bond issues to put together enough to do that. We decided that we would try and get the Southeast Interchange on the interstate system so that the right-of-way could be 10% local, 90% federal, and the construction the same way. Otherwise, it was going to be 50% local, 50% federal. Right-of-way is one thing, but the construction, we would never have been able to put that up locally. So with the help of Dewey Bartlett, who was then in the U.S. Senate, he was a friend of Secretary of Transportation Volpe. So he arranged for them to look at this as an interstate project, and we had a very important meeting in Washington with the Secretary and Senator Bartlett about this designation. And we gained the favor of the Department of Transportation to change the designation of that Southeast Interchange. So even though we had lost the other interchange through the Riverside Expressway condemnation, we gained the Southeast Interchange, which gave us our connection to the Broken Arrow and completed the loop around the Central Business District. So that was a very, very, very key element in our overall transportation plan.
So then, in the middle 70s, you began work on our new Performing Arts Center.
Yes, all during my term, even as street commissioner and as mayor, there was a lot of interest in replacing the theater on Brady. Actually, in 1969, the city put up what they called an omnibus bond issue. Terrible name. A lot of people referred to it as the ominous bond issue. It was put up in kind of a hurry and had 7 or 8 different issues in it, in the one big issue. We had traffic control, we had water and sewer, we had storm sewer, we had parks, we had streets, we had a theater, actually a theater. The theater envisioned was to do some renovation in the Assembly Center, I think, or to reconfigure that. At any rate, we put several $1 million in for a theater. It was probably the least popular. We had a river project in that issue also. We had money in for a low water dam development. We had a study that had been completed on the river development. It's very similar to what's going on today, but it was done then by the architectural firm of Hudgens, Thompson, and Ball. So it would have been the middle 60s that we had this foresight. I might add as just an anecdote that my secretary through my City Hall days was Ann Baxter, a lovely lady who had worked for city commissioners back in the 40s and then worked for Sid Patterson when he was a street commissioner prior to me. And she told me about her water and sewer commissioner, I think, in the earlier days that had proposed damming up the Arkansas River. That thought was in the minds of several of our Tulsa chamber types and the futurists, you might say, for development. But at any rate, in '69, we had a river project, and the court got beat along with all the other things in this '69 bond issue. The only thing that passed in the 69 issue was a water and sewer issue.
So they could pick and choose which ones they wanted to vote for.
They could pick any one of these. You had to have all separate issues, obviously.
So then the idea of a theater goes down.
Yeah, the theater went down, so that was 69. When I became mayor, there was still interest in that. We had a very important retreat. I can't remember the exact year, but I'm going to say it was 70, 71, something like that. We had a downtown gathering of Katie Westby, and Joe Williams was part of it. He was the Williams Brothers guy and the president of their company here. Birch Mayo and others attended this retreat. A fellow named Halpern, who was a land use planner, came here and facilitated the retreat. We had everybody walking around downtown looking at sites and what should they do and all this. Charles Norman, a very close friend of mine who died just last year, was also very important because he had been chairman of a municipal theater study committee. And they had looked at all of the older buildings that might be converted, one of which was the Akdar Theater at 4th and Denver. Actually, we did a serious study about converting their theater into a new municipal theater. It wasn't really a good choice, but it seemed to be the best thing for what money could be raised. So we kind of drifted along with this idea of needing a theater very badly until the Williams Company put together the Downtown Urban Renewal Project that resulted in the Williams Center.
We now know the Performing Arts Center is at 3rd and Cincinnati, so that was all blight. It needed to be cleaned up.
Yeah, actually, it had already been cleaned up. By then, the buildings had been virtually cleared from a large part of the area, and the Tulsa Urban Renewal Authority had been trying to take proposals on development of that area, which is now like a 9-block area. It went from 3rd Street down to 1st Street and all the way to the railroad track, so to speak, and from Cincinnati over to Boulder. At any rate, that area had not been able to attract any significant development proposals. However, when the Williams Company decided that they wanted to build a new building, they were in the present NBT building on Boston. They were growing very fast and needed a lot of office space. They hired an architect, Yamura Yamasaki from Detroit, to come in and design a Williams Center office complex. Since we had our kind of foot in the door with Joe Williams, he knew that we needed a theater. And so, in talking with his brother John, they kind of settled on that perhaps a theater could go in the new Williams complex. So they picked out the corner where the Hotel Tulsa had been, the half block just off of Cincinnati and north of 3rd Street. They designated that as a potential site for a theater. John had, in his work with Yamasaki, very ingeniously converted what was a 2-tower project of Yamasaki's for the Williams Company to a 1-story tower. Yamasaki had presented 2 towers of about 25 or 30 stories each, and John suggested he put one on top of the other and just make it bigger. The building that Yamasaki developed was very similar to the World Trade Center towers that went down 9/11. At any rate, John saw the potential of the theater site, so he approached Lita Chapman to make a major league gift for a theater. She consented. She agreed that she would give $3.5 million. He then called me in for a meeting, and he said, Bob, if we could go half and half, public-private, on a $14 million budget, I'll raise $7 million privately, half of which is already assured through Mrs. Chapman. If the city could put up $7 million, we'd have enough to build this theater for $14 million. That's how we got started with the theater.
But then, did that have to go to a vote?
Yes, the city would have had to vote on the $7 million. So it looked like a slam dunk to me to have half of the money already available. And sure enough, it was, because where the theater had failed in 1969 by 25-75, in 1973, it passed by 75-25. So we put up our $7 million. John raised another $3.5 million privately from individuals who were interested in a new theater. That gave us our $7 million from the private, $7 million from the public, $14 million to do the project. So we proceeded to design the theater and go to bids. However, when the bids came in, they were like $18 million. John came back to the city and said he'd raise another $2 million if the city had put in another $2 million. Fortunately, at that time, the city was receiving what were called revenue sharing dollars through the Nixon administration. They were giving us a real resource for capital dollars that we didn't have otherwise. We agreed that we would find our $2 million in the city through the revenue sharing door, and John went out and raised $2 million more from virtually the same individuals that had pledged the other $7 million. So we ended up with $18 million of raised money. We went back to the construction of the theater. They actually formed a committee, a very unique idea that Charles Norman had conjured up. They entered a contract with Flintco on a fixed fee basis to build the theater. We were in a time of hyperinflation, so there was a lot of pressure to get the work done while inflation was raging around us, but it also enabled us to earn a lot of interest on the money that we had already raised through the bond issue and through the private donors. So we put the money to good use. We finished the construction of the theater for $18 million. We actually ended up with $1 million over that because of interest earnings, and that $1 million went into our Performing Arts Center Trust, which still operates today to encourage programming of events at the theater.
The opening night had to be a big night. Do you remember what the opening performance was?
Well, Ella Fitzgerald was the big attraction for opening night. The Tulsa Symphony, of course, had a wonderful program planned. It was a gala night, historic, certainly for Tulsa.
So you stood on stage and welcomed the crowd.
Absolutely. One of the finest treats of being a mayor was to have that theater a real presence. As you know, and we all know, it's been maintained in perfect condition ever since.
So that was in 1977.
77 was the opening of the theater.
You were talking about the development of the Williams Center and the towers. That included then a shopping area and ice rink. You might talk about that.
Yes, they envisioned a big retail complex. They had attracted a hotel, a quality 5-star hotel. They developed the Williams Green, which is really an outstanding urban park today, with a parking structure underneath it to serve the hotel and the theater. And then they had a large complex within the tower, what is now the BOK Tower. They had a large retail complex in there and some other office buildings that were cited in the plan.
Ice skating rink, families would go down there?
Yeah, the initial development of the Williams Center included an ice rink, a variety of cafes and restaurants, no nightclubs as I recall.
A movie theater in there.
And a theater, right, small theater, which is in use today by the Williams companies.
Also, you were involved with the Tulsa Parks and Recreation Department, took a special interest in that.
I had seen during my days as a street commissioner how neglected the city park system was. I think the last bond issue to fund any parks in Tulsa prior to my going in as a street commissioner was probably in 1957 or 58, something like that. So that was one of the things that I wanted to do. And we did put a park issue up in 72 right after I was elected, or 71. At any rate, that was the first park issue that had been put up in many, many years. We put a lot of emphasis on Mohawk Park, as well as some funding sources for acquiring new park land. Not so much development as just getting the land. That gave us a major renovation of Mohawk and also gave us some funds for site acquisitions.
And then you made the zoo a very attractive place.
Yeah, the zoo had a lot of interest from volunteers and various civic groups. There was a lot of interest in getting our zoo developed as an attraction not only for tourists but also just for the education of our own young children. So that came about with what they call the Living Museum.
Then you went out of office in 78.
Yeah, I left office in 78. I'd had 4 terms, 4 two-year terms, and elected not to get involved in other political races at that time.
Certainly you were asked to.
Well, there was an opportunity because Dewey Bartlett was going through cancer at the time and really could not finish his term. So there was a vacancy in his term after he died.
You could have been appointed.
Probably not appointed, but I think I could have run for that office. Of course, that's when Don Nichols ran. Don was only 32 or something, a very young man, but a very able politician. I did not have an interest really in trying to run for that office. My wife, she was an only child. Her father was still alive and living here in Tulsa, and she was not attracted at all to moving away for the rest of his lifetime.
You were also active with the Boy Scouts.
Yeah, I got active in the Boy Scouts in the early 60s, mainly as a fundraiser for their local council. Migrated through a series of appointments up to chairman of their regional scout organization, which is a 5-state area around us. Then I went on the national board in 1978, and I'm still on the executive board for the Boy Scouts of America. And I've had a great interest in that. All 3 of my boys have been Boy Scouts. The 2 younger ones became Eagle Scouts. When I learned how important that was, I stressed that a little more in their development. It's been a great satisfaction for me to work with the Boy Scouts. They are outstanding, and they are the major youth organization for the country. They do so much good, and I've been very, very, very satisfied with the work I've done there.
I recently visited with Fred Drummond, very active in scouting himself. Pointed out that I think the first chapter of scouting actually began in Oklahoma, in Pawhuska.
Yeah, the first scout troop was in Oklahoma.
Let's talk about your family and talk about your wife and her name and how you met her and that type of thing.
Jeannie was a native-born Tulsan. Her father was W.W. Morse, M-O-R-S-E, a descendant of Samuel F.B. Morse, the man who founded the telegraph and the Morse code. Their family line went way back in the Northeast. Her mother was from Georgia, had a very southern accent. They came here probably in the 30s, the 1930s or so. Jeannie was born in 1929, so she was a couple years younger than I was. She was an only child, so she didn't have any brothers and sisters to hammer her or hammer on. But she was a very unspoiled person. That's the way her parents were. Her father was the general manager of Brown Duncan, which was a very important retail store in downtown Tulsa for many, many years, owned by the Duncan family. He left his employment there in the early 50s, moved to Wisconsin to run a store in Madison. They lived there about 10 years, and we used to visit there in the summers, obviously. Our children enjoyed those visits very much.
Did you meet Jeannie in high school? Or?
Yeah, Jeannie was just graduating from high school when I met her, and I was either at TU or away at Purdue during our dating years. When I finished college, we got married, and we started having our family. We had 6 children. We had 3 boys and 3 girls, all of them married locally, with the exception of 1. So today, I still have my 6 children. They're all well and healthy and very productive. I have 16 grandchildren and 3 great-grandchildren.
And now is it a grandson you have who is in the city council?
Yes, my oldest daughter, Susie Bynum, has a son named G.T. Bynum, the 4th, who was elected to the city council a year ago and will be running for re-election again this year. That's an interesting family because his great-great-grandfather was mayor of Tulsa in about 1900, the 2nd mayor of Tulsa. So the Bynum family is old line Tulsa. We're very proud of that and the heritage that exists there.
And you had a nephew who was the mayor of Tulsa.
Yes, my nephew Bill, who's my brother Buddy's son, was mayor, elected in 2002. Among his other things that he did, he was greatly responsible for the arena that we have in downtown Tulsa. He put together a very good quality building. I think he helped assure that we had a good architect, a very world-famous architect. He not only did a beautiful building, but a first-rate quality building structurally. It has been economically successful since it was opened last August.
As you look back over your life, can you pinpoint a project or projects that gave you the most satisfaction?
Well, there's certain public projects that I'm very proud of. Probably in a construction manner, the port would be the one, even though there are many, many others who had a lot more leadership responsibilities in that than I did. You have to remember the bond issue that the city passed for the port was in the Maxwell administration. I always had great respect for Jim Maxwell, as well as my successor, Jim Hughley, because both of them were very innovative in bringing new things. They were not afraid to try something new. Maxwell developed a lot of the city-county associations that we have today, our library system, our health system, the planning commission. All of those are city-county efforts. We see today a lot of problems between the city and the county because of that lack of camaraderie or something that existed in those earlier days. Jim Hughley did the same thing. He was able to establish new things. We had our Model Cities program that attempted at least to do a lot of development in North Tulsa with the black community. We gave a lot of representation to minorities through committees and new organizations and new ideas that at least surfaced some of the important racial divisions that we had. Hughley started the Tulsa Housing Authority, for instance, which to me has been one of the most important elements of the city development over the years in taking care of the need for low-income assisted housing.
Well, those are all big building years, weren't they? And exciting. What do you think was one of your best traits? How do you view yourself?
First of all, I think in the commission form itself, it is a coalition-building form of government. The mayor was the chief executive of the city, but he only had a limited number of departments, mostly the executive departments. All of the operational departments under that form were under the commissioners, the 4 commissioners that were elected, and the city auditor. So in order for the mayor to advance an idea or a new program, while the mayor controls the formation of the budget, so to speak, he or she would not have anything to do with ordering out street crews or picking up things for the waste disposal or doing those things. The mayor had to coalesce support from among the commission elements. That meant that you had to be a coalition builder for your ideas. My theory always was get the best ideas you can from the best people and advance them the best way you can. I lost some things. I lost some bond issues. I lost a project to get a low-security prison in Tulsa, which I wanted very badly, because I knew that these prisoners coming out of jail were all coming back to our town. Why shouldn't we have them here where we can give them vocational training and more attention so they're more rehabilitated? But we lost that in a big way here in Tulsa.
People were afraid?
They're afraid of citing it. It's the same old thing, not in my backyard, anywhere else. So I remember the good things we did. We did a lot more good things than the things we failed on.
As you talked about the river and you talked about the Low River Dam, and that was being talked about in the 60s, are you surprised that we are sitting here today, right now, trying to fund a low water dam? Here we are in 2009. That's got to be a surprise to you.
Well, it is, because it's just taken too long for reasons I wouldn't necessarily opine on at the time. I think we missed an opportunity when we lost the vote in 2007. That spilled milk, so to speak, so let's go on to the next one and hope that we can get funding for some development. Meanwhile, I'm very pleased with what's taking place along the bank, being funded through donations like from the Kaiser Family Foundation or from Quick Trip, their development. There's still a lot of things that can be done with respect to riverbank development without having the low water dams there.
After you left office as the mayor of the city of Tulsa, what did you do then?
Well, I just went back into my private business. I do a lot of work with our family. Since my parents died, we have a couple of trusts that I'm a major factor in overseeing. So that's my business today. I'm still in the oil and gas ventures from a personal standpoint. I still try and keep a hand in some of the civic jobs as a volunteer, particularly with St. John Health System and with some of the Catholic schools that I associate with.
Notre Dame, there is a facility there named in the honor of your family.
Yes, there's a LaFortune Student Center at Notre Dame that my mother and dad funded. It was the renovation of a very old building on the campus, but almost right next to the main Golden Dome administration building at the school. They did a renovation of the older classroom building, and then in the middle 80s, our family, all of our family members, participated in a major expansion of that building to the status it has today as a LaFortune Student Center. So it's very much in use, mainly for student activities and for campus restaurants for the students and meeting places.
Describe your father to us.
My dad was very, very much indoctrinated into work and responsibility. There's very much a self-discipline about how he conducted his own life. He's very compassionate. He always had great sensitivity to people who worked, especially just normal laborers that he would see or encounter. He could talk to anybody. He could talk to the most important person in the country, a president, as he did with President Eisenhower when he was serving in his administration. He could talk to the normal day laborer working at the park. He used to go out to LaFortune Park a lot. He'd go out there almost every week. He'd walk around. He might sit down on a bench. Some golfer would come by or somebody would come by. He wouldn't tell him who he is. He would engage him in a conversation. Well, how'd your day go? What do you like about the park? Do you see anything wrong out here? Something that might need fixing? And then he'd get their ideas. If he did, he wouldn't do anything about it. Just go talk to the superintendent and say, you better take a look at this. It's going to need some help. Without a doubt, the park was the golden part of his life. Even after the initial development, remember that he built the 3-par golf course as an addition. He built some of the tennis courts as an addition, then the running track around it, and the playground that went with it. All of those things came later after the initial development. He never, unfortunately, saw the part on the 51st and Hudson corner, nor would he have seen the newer development of the tennis courts, which would please him greatly.
It must give you an enormous sense of pride. Drive up Yale, and particularly on the weekends and Sunday afternoon, you see all these families playing, and you can see that they're having family get-togethers and cooking out and all. That's just got to give you a lot of pride and pleasure.
Well, I've seen a lot of parks around the country and cities I visit. I don't think there's a more complete small urban park than LaFortune Park. It's unique. You think of all the different activities, all the things that are going on there at the same time. It's just a gem among park systems.
Yeah. As students listen to this interview, any advice for life, for careers, for public service, anything you'd like to impart to them?
Well, I think today especially we need young people who are interested in public service. And that's why I was so pleased to see my grandson run for city office. He's had probably a political bent since he got out of college because he went to work for Senator Nichols for 5 years, then he worked for Senator Coburn for a year or two. He's always had an interest. It's kind of in his blood. Well, it goes back to his family, his great-great-grandfather being a mayor. So I'm really proud of that. But more people need to have an interest and not a scorn for political life. Politicians are needed in our country, good ones. If the good people don't step up, the ones who aren't that capable will. And we'll just have, so to speak, a vacuum where we need new leadership. I might add, I think young people need to feel a sense of responsibility in everything they do. They need to get through high school without getting in troubles. They need to watch the people they run around with. They need to pick and choose good friends. It's probably one of the most important things that I think I've had. I've always had good friends. I've been proud of them and not ashamed to associate with them. And the other thing is to keep a sense of integrity about your life. Ethics today have been under severe stress, especially among our top corporate leaders in the country and among a lot of our political leaders. So integrity is probably the most important thing that you ought to be thinking about when you take on a job or a responsibility.
In your life, would you look back on certain individuals that you look to Obviously, your father would be one of them, but anybody else outside the family as mentors?
Obviously, I would have run across or worked for people that I respect. A lot of my teachers, in particular at high school level, and some even at the college level, that I remember as kind of forming my outlooks and my attitudes. I would say that's particularly true of the priests I had at Cassia Hall and the sisters I had even in grade school at Marquette, sisters of the Benedictine community here. Those two orders, Augustinians and Benedictines, have a very wonderful attitude about their life, and I think they impart that to you when they teach you.
And you've been very active in the Catholic Church.
That's one of the reasons that I think I've stayed so active, is because of the religious influences from my teachers.
Are there any names at Marquette and in Cassia, students that you went to school with that grew up in Tulsa that we might recognize, that you stayed in touch with?
Well, Father Theodore Tack, who is presently stationed at Cassia Hall, was a classmate of mine. He had a vocation to the priesthood. He went right into the seminary out of high school. He later lived in Rome for about 29 years as a priest and became the superior provincial of the Augustinian order worldwide, over 3,000 Augustinians. And he kept that job for 12 years. He and I were obviously contemporaries in high school. We were very close friends through grade school and high school. We still maintain a close friendship. He's had a very favorable influence on my life, obviously, because of his dedication to his own vocation.
Names of Cassia Hall students that stayed in Tulsa and got involved locally that you can think of?
Well, Bill LaFortune went to Cassia. Frank Keating went to Cassia. I'm sure there are others who've been very prominent in their own fields.
So that overall, as you're remembered, you could be remembered as what?
Good old Bob. Good old Bob. You know, I've never wanted to get a lot of recognition. I don't think that's necessary. People know what I've done. I see it every day. I don't go almost anywhere in Oklahoma that I don't see somebody that remembers my face or my name or some association with the LaFortune family. That's a proud moment for me, especially when I'm with some of my grandchildren and they see somebody just say, "Hey, Bob, isn't that you?" Or, you know, "I remember you. We met 20 years ago." Or somebody will come up and say, "Hey, Bob, remember I worked in your campaign?" And I say, "My campaign? That's 30 years ago." Those are proud moments, obviously, and not because you did anything about it. It's just that they have a favorable impression of what you did.
Yeah. Well, thank you for this time. Appreciate it very much. Very nice of you.
Covered a lot. I think what you've done is very good.
You have been listening to the Voices of Oklahoma podcast, stories taken from the oral history website, voicesofoklahoma.com. At the website, you will discover an array of storytellers. Many you will know. Some will be new to you, but all will be worth your time. This work depends on listeners like you, who are interested in learning about the great people of Oklahoma. Our website provides an opportunity to donate to this 501c3 project, which preserves Oklahoma history, one voice at a time. voicesofoklahoma.com.